Oh, my father was a Republican.
Right.
And he had 5 brothers fighting on
Franco's side.
So it was decided I would do a journey through Spain, telling the story of my late father, who had been on one side of the Spanish Civil War with 5 brothers fighting on the other. And in my railway journey, I went to speak to my uncles about what it had been like to be in a family that was so divided.
Welcome to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast. I'm Christian Walmart, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. In every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, what have we got today?
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. Firstly, today, we're off to Wales to hear about the exciting developments in the new railway investment strategy for the nation. And we'll be hearing from Ken Skates, MS, the Minister for Transport in the Welsh Government. Then you've secured an interview with something of a media superstar, Michael Portillo, the former railway minister, who since leaving politics has pursued media interests by presenting and participating in a wide range of television and radio programmes looking at the railways around the world. Loyal listeners will know that in the Calling All Stations podcast, we've several times explored the distinct transport policies which are being pursued by the Welsh Government, with particular relevance to the proposals and changes that have happened in the railways. A big announcement was made in February of this year, when in fact the Prime Minister travelled to Cardiff to support the launch of a strategy paper called Today, Tomorrow, Together, a vision for rail across Wales and borders. Christian has been speaking to Ken Skates, MS, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Transport and North Wales in the Welsh Government, about these proposals and what they could mean for the future of transport in Wales.
Quite a lot has been happening in Wales over transport, with several important initiatives. So I thought I would catch up with the Cabinet Secretary for Transport in North Wales, Ken Skates, otherwise known really as the kind of rail minister or transport minister for Wales, who's going to tell me about the initiative called the Railway Plan for Wales, which is, I think, very innovative. The fact that actually Wales has a railway plan. So maybe we'll start off with that, Ken, and tell me, how this has come about, because we don't actually have a railway plan for the UK. So you're ahead of us there.
Well, it's fantastic to join you. And I remember back it must have been around 2016. It was just after I was appointed in my previous life as Transport Minister, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Economy. And we met and discussed the birth of Transport for Wales. It was an event in Cardiff. And you gave me some really sound advice. But it was at a time when Transport for Wales had only just really been formed, with the intention of procuring the operator and the infrastructure operators for the Wales and Borders franchise and the Cardiff, Greater Cardiff Metro, what became known as the South Wales Metro. And in the pretty short space of time, in rail terms, we were able to deliver that metro. We electrified 170 kilometres of Valley's lines, which is no mean feat in less than 10 years. And we've been operating the Wales and Borders franchise since 2018. But what's been lacking is rail infrastructure upgrades outside of the metro area.
Actually, Ken, you slightly threw that away. I think it's rather more than a little achievement having done that. I think it's a remarkable achievement having kind of saved the valley lines, electrifying them, put new trains on them, and so on. But I have already written about that. But I do think that it's something worth kind of boasting about. But anyway, go on. So you go on from that.
It is something, I'll be perfectly honest, it's something that we're really proud of, but we've lived and breathed this, and it's something that is quite familiar to us now. But it was an incredible project to take on the Core Valleys lines, and also to take on the franchise as well. At the time of Carwyn Jones being First Minister, he was the person that drove the need for Welsh Government to take control of the franchise. He was the person that drove the need for us to create the metro out of the Core Valleys lines. And at the time, he was negotiating with a government at Westminster that was suggesting that we could only operate trains up to the border. And so with our train services stopping at, Chirk and...
I bet it would
Yeah,
puzzle control as well, yes.
Exactly. But, he persevered, and all credit to him. It was one of the biggest ambitions that I think we've had in 27 years of devolution. And it's actually turned out to be one of our greatest success stories, I think. But the one thing that we've really been lacking is the investment in infrastructure outside of the Core Valleys lines, i.e. those areas that are still in the control of the Department for Transport and Network Rail. And for 14 years or so, I was engaging with UK government ministers, and they really didn't have much of an interest in investing heavily in Welsh Rail or the Wales route, because there was this obsession with the Treasury Green Book. And if you follow that to the word, you're never going to get investment outside of areas that are already affluent and already incredibly well served by
Actually, but yes,
public
because the
transport.
methodology kind of doesn't point to enough people and all that. I mean,
right.
it's a terrible problem, and it discriminates against sparsely populated places like Wales.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole of the North, this is something that Rachel Reeves has talked about quite considerably. Andy Burnham wrote a book about it with Steve Rotherham. It's a major problem in the way that the UK economy and UK investment has been attributed in recent times. Actually, I say recent times, for many, many decades.
Yes, absolutely.
But-
But so suddenly you change. You suddenly managed to get the UK government interested in
Yes.
investing in Wales. How did you manage that?
It was a very careful operation. W- w- People listening to this may be aware of the great row that took place over HS2 and how it was classified, and then subsequently how it was cut short, which meant that there was no economic benefit for Wales. So I came back into government as Transport Minister in March 2024, and immediately began discussions with the person who would end up as Secretary of State for Wales, Joe Stevens, about how we address A, historic underfunding in rail infrastructure, and then B, how we address the injustice of HS2 funding and the lack of consequential funding for Wales. So we had a plan, and then subsequent to Joe and Keir Starmer's government being elected, we then had agreement in late 2024 to have a combined ask of UK Treasury to be perfectly aligned across Welsh Government, Wales Office, Department for Transport. That then resulted in the Comprehensive Spending Review allocation, which has enabled us for the first time to really go ahead with some major infrastructure projects outside of the Core Valleys lines. But at the same time, we decided to embark on a major piece of work of bringing together all of the development work that's taken place on the Wales route over many years and present it as a package, as a vision. So Today, Tomorrow, Together commenced as a piece of work that was very, very much under the radar, and deliberately so. We didn't want the industry to be too excited about it. We didn't want UK government to be too scared of it because it was going to be a major ambition. But that work continued for some time. It was being led by Transport for Wales, who were also working incredibly closely with Network Rail. And there are people in Network Rail who I think have just been phenomenal. Likewise, TFW, I mean, full credit to them. As a relatively new organisation, they have performed over and above expectations. But then we had the launch of Network North Wales, which was the precursor to the bigger, broader vision for rail across Wales and the borders. And the launch of Network North Wales carried with it a pretty hefty...
That was last year, wasn't it? It was in the summer.
right.
Last year. Yeah.
Yeah, it was in May of last year. And we were fortunate enough to have, representatives of industry, UK government, businesses. It was a big occasion, and it was incredibly well received by UK government, which then enabled us to continue discussions in a very, very collaborative way on how we could put together a document, a vision that would be supported entirely by UK government. So that work continued through to the autumn of last year, and we were about to launch it when we heard that actually UK government were more positive and more supportive than we were used to. So we carried on discussions through the winter, and as a result of those discussions, last week the Prime Minister came to Wales, not just to endorse and support the vision, but to commit to delivering it as fast as possible, and with the funding over a number of spending periods. And that is something that we have never, ever had. The vision, the document, the plan, and now the funding and the commitment to deliver it.
But it would be fair to say it's not. I mean, I've read through the document. It's by no means all funded, is it? I mean, even the 7 stations are sort of not entirely. I mean, that's what Keir Starmer promised: 7 new stations, which is a plan of yours. I mean, that he's obviously endorsed, but they're not quite all funded, are they?
No, they're not, and that's for a good reason. In that the average station of the type that we're looking at building, those 5 burn stations, they normally take 5 to 6 years from where we are now.
And the side of the South Wales line, aren't they?
That's right.
Between Cardiff and the border, basically.
Absolutely, that's correct. Yes, and also work needs to be done to the relief lines to ensure that services can then operate. So the work is going to take longer than the 3 years of the spending period. But what we've got is enough money to get us to the point where they'll be very advanced. And generally, once you start building something, you don't stop. HS2 the exception. But we've got enough money to get through to the end of the spending period, and we've held a commitment from UK government to fund them in the entirety. So we've already got that commitment of additional money in the next spending period. But crucially, I think, we will be able to complete some of those stations in this current period.
Oh, wow. Right.
It's likely that Magor and Andy will be completed first, and I've got hopes that will be completed within this spending period. And certainly the station at Deeside will be completed. I'm hoping that that's going to be completed in 2027, which would be a remarkable effort. But that's because it's going to be...
Just for listeners, that's up in the north on the Wrexham to Liverpool line.
That's it. You've got it exactly. So it's interesting, actually, in the Deeside Industrial Estate is one of Europe's biggest industrial estates, and it's one of the poorest served by public transport. And that then is putting huge pressure on the road network. So having a station right in the heart of Deeside Industrial Park will make a massive difference. But we're adopting a modular approach to this. And so we're calling it an experimental modular station. And it will be built in a fraction of the time that it would take a normal station to be built. But that's because the topography of the land, it's because the location lends itself perfectly to this rapid development. So
I was saying the other 5 stations in the south, you're also going to build to similar designs. Is that right?
They're going to be similar designs. They're not going to be like the Deeside Industrial Estate Station. They're going to be similar designs along the relief lines in South Wales. And then we also then have the 7th station that's funded, and that is Cardiff Parkway. And that's really an economic development project, because it's a real enabler for high quality jobs to be located just to the west of Newport, just to the east of Cardiff. And that'll take a lot of pressure off the road network within Cardiff itself. So that's a vitally important station too. And then also within the spending review, we had money allocated for improvements on the North Wales Main Line, which are going to enable us, and the work has gone incredibly well. It will enable us to operate 50% more trains on the North Wales Main Line from this May, which is a pretty unprecedented uplift in the north.
I seem to remember the Tory government promised electrification of the North Wales line. Is that not happening?
I'm afraid that was a joke and an announcement. So if we go back to when Rishi Sunak made that announcement, I have it on good authority that DfT weren't even aware that he was going to make that announcement. And subsequent to making the announcement, nobody then asked Network Rail to do any work on it. So it was a promise from the leader of a dying government that was shortly to be replaced.
Okay.
However,
Yeah.
but importantly, electrification of the North Wales Main Line is in our £14 billion vision and our plan for rail in Wales. The critical difference between what was touted in the past as electrification and what we have in mind is that we're going to learn from the investment in the South Wales valleys and implement a scheme that will see discontinuous electrification. Because the huge, enormous cost to electrification is existing infrastructure that needs to be
moving
rebuilt.
the tunnel, cutting below the tunnels and stuff, all that kind of stuff.
That's
yeah.
Exactly. So in the metro area, we've got, we're going to have the electric trams, and then we've got bimodal trains, and we've also got the trimodal trains, the as they're called, the flirts. And so we've got the experience, proven experience, and the technology to be able to develop discontinuous electrification for the North Wales Main Line, and that's one of the major projects in our vision.
Okay, so the railway plan also contains kind of improvement to some of the lines, doesn't it? So the Marshes line and some other lines as well. I mean, is that for longer in the future, or will some of that get done in the next 3 or 4 years?
Well, the plan in its entirety will take us through to 2040 or 2044 if rail does tend to take a little longer than you plan. But that's helpful, because we've just declared that we want to be part of the bid for the 2040 or 2044 Olympics with the North of England. So it gives us an end point for the entire package of projects. Now, on the lines, work is already underway on the Wrexham to Liverpool line, and that's taking place at Payswood. That's really important, because you've got freight that is effectively holding up passenger services at Payswood. That work is going to be completed relatively soon, so in this spending period, and that in turn will enable us to operate 2 reliable services per hour between Wrexham and not just Bidston. We're looking at Wrexham through to Liverpool, and that'll be with battery technology. So that's a game changer in terms of movements of people between some of the biggest employment zones in the UK: Liverpool, Deeside Industrial Estate, Wrexham, with the biggest industrial estate in Wales. And then work is also underway on the Cardiff, on the South Wales relief lines, and work will also get underway on the Corriton line as well in Cardiff. Longer term, you're absolutely right. We're looking at electrification of the Marches line. We're also determined to deal with congestion at Chester. Now, a lot of my colleagues don't understand how important Chester is to rail in Wales. And I keep saying, okay, there's a border, but Welsh interests don't end at that border. There's no slate curtain there. And if we're going to get more train services in and out of Wales, we have to deal with the congestion problem at Chester. So we'll be doing just that. And then we're also going to be integrating Northern Powerhouse Rail with Network North Wales. And at the same time, we're going to be improving the Marches line, as I say, the Cambrian line, the Heart of Wales line, and we'll electrify through to Swansea. And in that area there, Swansea Bay, we've already got an established plan for a Swansea Bay and West Wales Metro. What Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, announced last week was that we've got the backing of UK government to deliver it. So
you really see railways as very important for the wider economy of Wales, because as you say, if you just look at it from a treasury point of view, they say, oh, it's not worth it, not enough people, not enough benefit, cost ratio not high enough, and so on. But you see railways as a vital kind of infrastructure improvement for Wales, and vital to the economy.
Absolutely. My view is, if you truly want to level up, build tracks and invest in skills. They're the two big things that can really transform a region. I was fortunate enough after graduating to go and visit family out in California, and I spent quite a bit of time out there in the East Bay, which is across the water from San Francisco. It's places like Oakland and Walnut Creek. And out there, the investment that was made in what's called the Bay Area Rapid Transport has been...
BART.
Yeah, BART. Amazing. So communities that once were left out, isolated, are now connected right through to San Francisco, to beyond to San Jose, to the airport as well. And it's made an incredible difference to people's lives, job opportunities, wealth creation in the East Bay. Because the East Bay was kind of, for quite a while, the poor relation to Marin County across the Golden Gate Bridge. My view is that you get the greatest return in terms of equalizing opportunity when you invest in public transport infrastructure.
Okay, well, that brings us nicely to buses. I mean, you've got plans to reorganise the buses as well, haven't you?
We have. We received royal assent just last month for our bus bill. And it's ambitious. I do believe we can deliver on it, but it'll take time. And the bus bill essentially enables us to take control of the entire bus network in Wales.
There's a Manchester type kind of arrangement, is it, like the B?
That's it. Yeah. And Transport for Greater Manchester have been incredibly helpful in supporting us. And actually, the new chair of Transport for Wales is Vernon Everett, who is one of the most experienced people in Europe in this area. So we're really well placed to deliver a network that meets passengers' needs over profit.
And would you view this as an integrated? I mean, like where there isn't a good rail service, you might put in a bus service, or where there isn't any rail service. I mean,
as far as the network is concerned, we're not going to distinguish. We're going to have one network.
Right.
And that network will combine rail, it'll combine trams, it'll combine what we call Traws Cymru, which are express bus services. We're just going to have one network, one timetable, and one ticket. Complete integration.
Right.
And it's a major ambition. It will take time. We're going to start with the southwest of Wales next year, franchising of bus services, and then we'll move to North Wales, Southeast Wales, and Mid Wales.
Oh, you divided it into regions, haven't you? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and that's really important, because what we can do with the regions is work very closely with each of the councils, because some councils have, even in the depths of austerity, maintained a subsidy for bus services, and we're determined to ensure that those councils that wish to invest in bus services are able to do so for their area. So designing the network on a regional basis is very important. We've also pledged, this is a political point, but we've also pledged as a Welsh Labour Party to introduce a £2 fare cap, and we've learned from other areas We've introduced a £1 fare cap for young people, and that's proving to be incredibly popular. But the fare cap will only go so far. The big difference is made to bus transport when you increase the network itself, when you have more services, more routes. So we're also pledging to introduce far, far more routes, and it'll be on the basis of what people tell us they need. We're also going to be using investment zone money, where we have investment zones, to introduce bus services that specifically connect communities where there are high levels of economic inactivity with our major employment centres. So an example is Wrexham Industrial Estate, which is very poorly served by public transport at the moment. That will have dedicated bus services which will operate to and from some of the most deprived communities in Wrexham and some of the areas where you've got the highest level of economic inactivity.
And how will this be funded? Because buses are expensive.
They are expensive. So part of it, where we've got the investment zones, it'll be investment zone money. But also outside of those areas, it's going to be Welsh Government money. So we've already spent in this Senedd term around £600 million supporting bus services, but we've had no control at all over the network. So we'll be able to use the money in a way that designs the network to meet the needs of people who have been, frankly, left isolated.
Okay. Well, we're slightly running out of time. So I can't resist, Ken, just asking you about the 20-mile-an-hour zones and whether you're sticking with that, whether you see it as having been successful. Statistically, it seems to show that lives have been saved. Are you sticking with it?
Yes. Statistically, we are quietly confident that the trend downward in terms of serious injuries and fatalities has been accelerated as a result of this measure.
Right.
That we've also accepted that the implementation of it wasn't exactly what we would have wished, in that we needed to, with hindsight, get far greater community buy-in.
Right.
In certain parts of Wales, it's proven to be a greater challenge than in other parts. However, we changed the guidance, which has, I think, really made a massive difference in terms of how people respond to 20 miles an hour as the default speed limit. And it's not just about the statistics, it's about feeling safer as well. And this is something that you can't really quantify. But every day now that I go down into my village, and I live in Ruaben, which is a village of about 3,000 people. When I go to the shops there, it used to be 30 miles an hour. It used to be terrifying to try to cross the road. And I'd see children there and my heart would be in my mouth. And now, because of 20 miles an hour, it feels safer. It is safer statistically, but it also feels safer. And I think that's made a major difference in terms of the quality of life that people enjoy in built-up areas.
I spend a holiday in North Wales every year and around Barmouth, and I did notice driving through Barmouth and walking in Barmouth that actually it did feel better, and it felt safer. But that was a little bit area where you can speed through if you wasn't a limit, and actually I think it made a big difference, and people were obeying it. I thought most people were obeying it. Actually, nobody was honking at me from behind. So, well, Ken, I can't thank you enough for that round tour of your policies. It's great to have you on, and maybe we'll come back in a year's time and see how all these rail schemes are progressing. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure.
In our previous episode, Christian spoke at length with Gerald Corbett about his new book describing his time as chief executive of Railtrack. At the launch event for Gerald Corbett's book at Lord's Cricket Ground, Christian caught up with former Rail Minister Michael Portillo, who, since leaving politics, has for the past 18 years been presenting TV programmes where he's travelled the world's railways. Christian asked Michael where this interest began.
I'm with Michael Portillo as we've just been at the launch of Gerald Corbett's book, When Something Happens. And I must say, Michael, you did a great job of presenting the book, and I think you were right to kind of warmly congratulate Gerald on what is a very open and quite emotional book, actually. But I just wanted to ask you really kind of how come you came to railways and why are you so obsessed with railways?
Well, I first came to railways, as a child. There was still steam locomotion when I was a child, and my annual journeys were to the Isle of Wight, where there was a marvellous steam railway running from Ryde.
Not the tube trains they have now. There was actually a proper steam train.
A steam railway that went from Ryde down to Ventnor in those days. And then my grandparents lived in Kirkcaldy, and so we would take the, I think it was called the Starlight Special, from King's Cross to Kirkcaldy. That was steam hauled. I think it took about 13 hours. And we had this magnificent dawn view of going over the bridge, the Forth Rail Bridge, and arriving at Kirkcaldy Station. But my next sort of major encounter with railways was when I became the Minister of State for Railways in 1988. So the Secretary of State for Transport had a couple of junior ministers, and one of them was designated to railways. That was my job. And
have you asked for that job?
No, I have not asked for that job. When I took it over, by the way, my predecessor was David Mitchell, and he was very sorry to be leaving the job, but he very generously, did a sort of debrief. And he said, by the way, you have to save the Settle to Carlisle Railway. And I took him at his word, and I felt that's something I absolutely had to do. I was very fortunate because the friends with a capital F of the Settle to Carlisle Railway were a good, well-organized group. And at the time when it seemed like it might be the last summer that the railway was going to run, they organized for people to travel on the railway, and the number of passengers went up that year to 350,000. And we found a jolly good engineer within British Rail who could repair the Ribblehead Viaduct for 3 million, not 9 million pounds. And so, with the fare box rising and the repair costs coming down, we managed to save the Settle of Carlisle Railway.
You've taken the steam out of my question, because I was going to ask, did you really save the Settle to Carlisle Railway? But I didn't realise you actually took the job with that in mind. Is that right?
It was put into my mind in the first hour that I did the job.
Wow.
By my predecessor. But another characteristic of this period, I'm afraid, is that there was a gruesome toll of accidents. Just before I took over, there was the King's Cross fire. There was, in a different sector, there was the Kegworth air disaster. There was the Townsend-Torriston ferry. And when I came to be the Minister of State for Transport, we had the Clapham Common disaster, Purley, and Milngavie. I was rushing from accident to accident.
So you mentioned this in the talk, three disasters in the space of a year or something.
Yeah, maybe nearer 2 years.
Yeah, right.
And so we've been talking this evening to Gerald Corbett, who was the chief executive of Railtrack at the time of the Ladbroke Grove and the Hatfield disasters. And I'd known Gerald since Cambridge. And when he told me he was taking the job, he said, "What advice do you have?" And I said, "Make sure you know what you're going to do when there's a rail accident." And you paid tribute this evening to Gerald. You said he did behave extraordinarily well when there were these terrible accidents. However, when there are two accidents and you're the chief executive, you're very likely to carry the can.
But as Minister of Transport, you weren't blamed for, or Minister of Railways, you weren't blamed for those crashes, were you? Or did it, or were you? But this was the days of British Rail still, so you didn't actually, you didn't get the blame for that?
I didn't get the blame for it. I mean, obviously I was extremely upset about it, and I wanted to know why they were happening. I mean, as actually with the two disasters we've just mentioned, Ladbroke Grove and Hatfield, the causes were extremely different from one accident to another. However, I mean, it wasn't good that there were fatal accidents, really rather frequently. And at one point, we've been pursuing my interest in trains. So long after I'd ceased to be Minister of State for Transport, I was into a different career. I'd lost my seat at the 1997 general election.
Famously, there's a book named after your loss of the seat.
Indeed. My loss was called The Portillo Moment.
Right, yes.
Which is journalistic shorthand for a man eating a bucket full of shit in public. It was a very humiliating experience.
But just to finish on your Minister of Transport, Carlisle to Settle is your great achievement. That was the thing you're proud of.
Yes.
And you were responsible. You made the decision, or you were able to make the decision.
I was able to make the decision, very much aided by the Friends of the Settled Carlisle Railway. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm proud of other things as well. I think I really got the Jubilee Line extension underway. It was tough to persuade the government to put the money into that, and I could see that Docklands was going to be a shambles without it. And I do feel very, very pleased that we managed to get the Jubilee Line extension underway. Having lost my seat in Parliament, I was given the opportunity to make a television programme. And there was a series which ran in those days called Great Railway Journeys. And the presenter was different each week. And the presenter was encouraged to be autobiographical. So it was decided I would do a journey through Spain, telling the story of my late father, who had been on one side of the Spanish Civil War with 5 brothers fighting on the other. And in my railway journey, I went to speak to my uncles about what it had been like to be in a family that was so divided by the...
So you have to explain which was which.
Oh, my father was a Republican.
Right.
And he had 5 brothers fighting on
Franco's side. Right.
That program, it was quite an emotional program for me, and it aroused a fair amount of interest at the time. This would be about, I think it was shown in 1999. But extraordinarily, 10 years later, a woman whose job it is to have ideas for new television formats thought about doing a railway program guided by a guidebook. And, this was going to be Bradshaw's Guide. But how did I get involved? Well, amazingly, the woman who by then was the chairman of this independent production company had 10 years before been a commissioning editor at the BBC. And she said, if you're doing a program about railways, I saw Michael Portillo 10 years ago do an emotive program about his dad. Let's get him. And this is the role of chance and serendipity in life.
Which you mentioned in the talk, and you're quite right. We've all had luck and bad luck, yes.
I've now spent 18 years making these railway journeys on television. I'm better known for that, I think, than for my political career, or at least I think I probably like to think that is the case.
Definitely.
And I'll go a stage further and say, my father's life was transformed by the Spanish Civil War. He had to leave as a refugee and live in Britain where he didn't speak the language. He didn't have qualifications that were valid here. But actually my life has been determined by the Spanish Civil War as well, because if I hadn't made that program back in 1998, shown in 1999, I wouldn't have spent the last 18 years making programs about railways.
And you've enjoyed it. Presumably you do it year after year. You must have enjoyed every moment of it.
Every moment.
And I have to ask you this, because people always ask me this. What is your favourite railway?
Oh, I think it's invidious to say what is one's favourite railway. I find I'm always impressed by the thing I've done most recently. Well, I've just come back from filming a new series in New Zealand, where I went on 5 heritage railways, all of which I would say are absolutely top-notch, scenically. Wonderful railway experiences. So let me off with that answer, if you will.
Okay, and so your next series is, as you intimated me, it's going to be on New Zealand railways. It's going to come out when?
The next series that you'll see on television is Japan, Korea, Uzbekistan, and a few European journeys. And New Zealand, I fear, will probably have to wait until 2027.
All right. Okay, just one political question, because the state of the Tory party. If you were still a politician, would you be in the Tory party or the Reform Party? Or maybe some other party totally?
I have become absolutely non-party political. I don't belong to any party. I never will belong to any party again. And when the general election comes, I shall decide how to vote.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That is a terrific interview. So kind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian.
Here's Christian's final thought from the departure lounge.
Well, I'm very pleased to be talking about the fact that London's Oxford Street, which I think is, really the country's premier shopping street, is now at last going to be pedestrianised. And loyal listeners will remember I have kind of mentioned this before, that I have campaigned on this since the last century. I wrote articles in the Evening Standard, bless its cotton socks, in the late 90s about pedestrianising Oxford Street. And when I campaigned to be the Labour candidate for mayor in my Walmart for London campaign, the pedestrianisation of Oxford Street was very prominent in the manifesto we put forward. And indeed, we even had a couple of campaign events, kind of handing out cards to people in Oxford Street and so on. And now at last, it's going to happen, because I remember the first hustings of the Walmart for London campaign, when we managed to I managed to get on the shortlist. And at the first hustings, Sadiq heard my campaign call for the pedestrianisation of Oxford Street and said, "Oh, that's a good idea. I think we should do that." And of course, Sadiq finally won the election and has been mayor for the next 2 terms as well. And now at last, thanks to the two things, thanks to the fact that Westminster at last went Labour, Westminster Council, in which half the street is in, went Labour, and that helped him. But also, he created a special development corporation that is now responsible for the street. And that means that he is able to channel some money into the pedestrianisation and indeed bring it about. So from September, at least half the street up to Oxford Circus, between Oxford Circus and Marble Arch, will be pedestrianised, with hopes that the other half will eventually also be pedestrianised. And I think this will be great for London's economy and great for London more generally. I think it will become a great tourist attraction because Oxford Street has declined in recent years, and at one point had all these kind of American candy shops and was really beginning to look very tatty. Most of those shops are now being gone, but nevertheless, it kind of lacks something of its former glamour, and hopefully pedestrianisation will restore that.
Thank you for listening to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast with Christian Warmar, which is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please do consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do follow us on social media. You can find Cogitamus Limited, Calling All Stations podcast, Christian Warmar and Mark Walker across a variety of platforms, including LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky and X.